Okay, welcome back. Now I'm sorely tempted to say something corny like, nature is neat, but you all already know that, so I'm going to move right back into the lesson. So we've just walked, maybe about 30 yards from the last spot you saw us at a few minutes ago, but we've moved into a very different kind of forest. It's just a slim forest here between this lowland area that we were in and the upland area, which in this particular spot in the world is represented by the Goshen Middle School sports fields. So just to prove you don't need to go that far to find really interesting trees and forest communities in most communities. So if we think back to what we were emphasizing down in the lowland, here the water situation is very different. So Tilly, if you could just sort of show along the edge of the hill here. Okay, so this is a hillside forest community. Water does not stay pooled at the surface. It's going to be infiltrating into the soil and sinking down towards the groundwater table. So Tilly, if you're able to come in and zoom, we'll take a look at the soil sample here. Come a little closer. So here is a look at the soils here, and even maybe through the camera you can see it's another darker colored soil, not as dark as the soil in the lowland, but still indicating there's a lot of organic material in the soil. But you might even be able to make out in the camera, or in the picture here, little grains of sand throughout this sample. And if I go ahead and crush these between my fingers, I quickly feel that grittiness. So we're dealing with a much sandier soil than we were just 50 feet that way. There's a lot of roots and other living and then decaying organic material in there. And there's even some bigger bits of gravel that I encountered when I dug down through here. Here's some roots of some of these spring ephemeral plants that we're seeing around us on the forest floor. The cutleaf toothwort and the spring beauty and some of those wonderful spring plants. Anyway, it's obviously a soil that water's going to move through a lot faster. So these trees, unlike the ones in the lowland forest, have roots that generally go deeper. A lot of the oak species have a taproot. In other words, a single long root that goes as deep as possible as one of their main anchor points and sources of water to give them flexibility during drier times of the year. And this time in the spring, the soil has plenty of moisture, but later on that won't be the case. Okay, pause.
How do you do that?
Just stop recording. All right, let's take a short walk together down, and we're going to take a look at a fallen tree here. But as we go, I'd like you to notice some of the plants that are making up the forest floor. I alluded to a couple just a second ago. So this is the season, of course, when spring ephemeral plants are really prominent, taking advantage of the fact that the trees haven't fully leafed out and the tree canopy is not blocking as much sunlight as it does the rest of the year. So this is one of my personal favorites, mayapple. Makes a delicious little fruit in July usually. It's tough to beat the raccoons to them though, they love them too. Let's walk over this way, Phil. But of course the other plant that's taking up space in this herbaceous layer of on the forest understory is would be seedlings of different trees. And in a little bit I'm going to have you do an activity where you try to work with some seedlings of a tree that is close to your house. But here, for instance, is a little black cherry seedling. Widely dispersed by birds, really common seedlings to encounter in the forest around here. In addition to woody plants that aren't fully the size of trees, things that you might think of as shrubs, and then other herbaceous plants that might survive all through the summer. All right, let's keep going, Tilly. By the way, here is a mature black cherry tree. Really distinctive bark. It has a very dark look to it compared to other trees around this part of the world in terms of the bark. It also looks, I've heard it described like burnt up potato chips, kind of crimpled up. And then beautiful cherry wood if you ever see any of the interior of it. But the bark is really, really distinctive. The leaves are just emerging up there. They're about halfway out. It's a really common shrub, again, in this part of the world, shrub honeysuckle. So this is actually an exotic species. It's not native to North America. It's native instead to the steppes of Central Eurasia. But one of the things we notice with a lot of non-native species is that one trait that seems to give them a little bit of adaptive advantage here is that their phenology is just a little bit ahead. So they leaf out just a little faster than their native counterparts here in the shrub understory, and have just a little bit longer season, and then they'll tend to be green longer into the fall as well. Which of course gives them more time for photosynthesis. Come on, Sophie. So here's a very different soil on this overturned oak tree that's fallen. You can tell from the look of it, it's a lot less organic material than either of the soil samples we looked at just a minute ago. This is much, much sandier. It's almost like beach sand. And again, this is all very close to each other. So that's one of the amazing things about Indiana. Even though it's a flat state, there's a lot going on in terms of the micro-topographic variance, and the soils are just variable all over the place. So again, this is a soil that would drain water quickly, so you would not find the water pooling up here, which as Tilly scans around, you'll see again, although it's level, it's dry. And it's sort of a little forest wedged in between the sloped dry forest and the level wet forest. Again, this is all in a really short area, which I think is amazing to learn. Okay, so just to tie you a little bit back to what you've been talking about in other parts of the class, when you think, for instance, about plants' roles in material cycling on Earth, one of the big ones obviously is carbon cycling. And so forests like this are an extremely important habitat for the potential to sequester carbon and store it out of the atmosphere for sometimes very long terms. Much like a mature grassland can be. In the case of forests, however, it's that carbon's mostly locked up in woody material, either living in living trees or dead material like these fallen logs that will take anywhere from years to decades to fully decompose. But also in the soils. That organic material that I've talked about in the soils is another type of carbon pool on the global level that's really important for keeping carbon out of the atmosphere. Trees also act as nutrient pumps, helping to mobilize nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, other key elements for growth out of the soils and bringing them into the food chain where other organisms can get access to them. So they're really important in those ways. And then later in the week, you'll be talking with Marco Stoltzfus about tree tissues, and especially their conductive tissues and the fact that their living tissues are concentrated only on the edges of trees, which makes them a little different from some more herbaceous plants. That'll be interesting to learn about. So I could go on and on, but I know you don't want to listen to me for hours over video. Hopefully someday we'll have a chance to do some botanizing in a forest or in the field together. That would be a lot of fun for me. But as you get ready for the second half of the lab activity, what I'm asking you to do is to see if you can identify tree seedlings from one particular tree that you're able to identify near your house, and then to think about the distribution of those seedlings around the parent plant. Because of course, unlike humans and many other animals, many other organisms, trees are a great example of what's called in biology a type 3 survivorship species. In other words, the vast majority of the individuals that ever exist of a species don't make it to maturity. So trees make a lot of seeds, but most of those seeds don't make it to adulthood. So you'll find always a lot more seedlings than you will adult trees, and in your second half of your lab activity you'll get a chance to experiment with some of those numbers. Okay. All right, so thanks. Have a good time with your lab work and a good time with the rest of botany. It's good to meet you all. Farewell.